Behind the shiny showcases of success and the headlines that tout achievements, there exists an emptiness that all the money in the world cannot fill. A man who seemed to have everything discovers, in the silence of his nights and the solitude of his luxurious penthouse, that what he most desires cannot be bought. But could anyone see beyond appearances? Amidst frustrating encounters, a daring plan, and the unexpected presence of a woman unlike any other, he discovers that the greatest wealth may lie in something he never sought. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. Victor Dalkamp observed the city through the panoramic window of his office on the top floor of the skyscraper. The lights began to dot the landscape as the sun set, colouring the sky with shades of orange and purple. His fingers drummed on the polished mahogany desk, a nervous habit that had persisted since childhood. At 35 years old, Victor had achieved more than he ever dreamed of. Dalkamp Enterprises, the company he built from scratch after years of relentless work, was valued in the billions. His face had graced business magazine covers, and his name was whispered with reverence in business circles. "Mr. Dalkamp, your 7 o'clock meeting has been cancelled," his assistant informed him through the slightly open door. Victor nodded, feeling an unexpected relief. "Thank you, Rebecca. You can go home, it's already late." When the door closed, he loosened the expensive tie and let out a heavy sigh. Despite all the success, something was missing. His penthouse apartment, as impressive as it was empty, awaited him every night with the same sepulchral silence. His phone vibrated. It was Lucas, his childhood friend, reminding him of the weekly soccer match. Victor smiled. Those games were his refuge, the only place where he could just be Victor, the boy who grew up in the simple neighbourhood, and not the CEO of Dalkamp Enterprises. On the neighbourhood court, far from the suits and board meetings, Victor felt free. Sweat ran down his face as he dribbled past Lucas, feeling the mud splash against his shins when he slipped trying to score. "Still terrible at finishing, huh?" teased Miguel, another long-time friend, extending his hand to help him up. Victor laughed, accepting the muddy hand. Some things never change. After the game, sitting at a plastic table in the corner diner, the conversation flowed like in their teenage years. "So, Victor, still single?" asked Diego, drying his face with a faded towel. "With all that money, there must be a line of suitors." Victor's smile faded. His friends noticed the subtle change in his expression. "The last one? It didn't work out," he replied, spinning a bottle between his fingers. "She was more interested in my wealth than in me." The silence that followed was filled with understanding. Everyone there knew the story. Amanda, Victor's last girlfriend, had meticulously planned every step of their relationship. For 6 months she pretended to have genuine interest, only to be caught confessing to a friend that she was putting up with Victor just for the lifestyle he provided. "You know what you need?" Lucas broke the silence, leaning forward. "To meet someone who has no idea who you are." Miguel nodded, excited. "My wife has a friend, a literature teacher. Intelligent, beautiful, and most importantly, she doesn't care about fame or money. And my sister-in-law knows a nurse who just moved to the city," Diego added. "I guarantee that neither of them has any idea who Victor Dalkamp is." Victor hesitated, playing with the label on the bottle. The idea of opening up to someone again terrified him, but something in his friend's words sparked a small flicker of hope. "And how do we ensure that they won't look up my name beforehand?" "Simple," Lucas replied with a conspiratorial smile. "Let's say you're just an ordinary guy, maybe even in a difficult situation. Anyone truly interested in you and not in your money will remain interested nonetheless." The idea seemed absurd, yet strangely tempting. A chance to discover if someone could love him for who he was, not for what he owned. "All right," he finally agreed. "But let's make one thing clear. No interference once the date starts." The first date was a poorly disguised fiasco. The woman, Vanessa, was a friend of Miguel's wife. Victor met her in a simple cafe, wearing jeans and a basic t-shirt instead of his usual Armani suit. "So, what do you do for a living?" she asked after the first few minutes of trivial conversation. "I'm currently unemployed," Victor replied, sticking to the plan. "I used to work in a snack bar, but I was recently let go." Something changed instantly in Vanessa's gaze. It was subtle, but Victor recognized it, the slight loss of interest, the eyes that began to wander around the room, the responses that became monosyllabic. "You know, I just remembered I have an appointment," she said, 20 minutes after they met. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Victor." He watched her leave, feeling the bitter taste of confirmation. His friends had assured him that Vanessa didn't know who he was, and it seemed she really didn't know, and she lost interest upon discovering she was with an ordinary man. The second date followed a similar pattern. Caroline, introduced by Diego, could barely hide her disappointment when Victor mentioned his financial difficulties. The conversation wilted like a flower without water, and she made up an excuse to leave before the food even arrived. Victor was beginning to lose hope. Perhaps the experiment only proved what he already feared. In a world obsessed with status, who would seek to know the person behind the appearances? That was when Grace Turner entered his life. The meeting was arranged in a small square in the city centre, near a hot dog stand. Victor arrived a few minutes early, leaving his car several blocks away and walking the rest of the way. When he saw her approaching, something in his chest settled. Grace wasn't flamboyant like the women he usually dated. She wore a simple dress, her brown hair tied back, and carried a worn fabric bag. But there was something in her walk, in the way her green eyes observed everything around with genuine interest, that captivated him immediately. "You must be Victor," she said, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Nice to meet you." Her hand was small, but the grip was firm. There were subtle calluses on her fingers, marks of someone who worked hard. The conversation flowed with a naturalness that surprised him. Grace was a librarian at a public school, and she talked about literature with a contagious passion. There were no artifices in her speech, no attempt to impress. When Victor mentioned that he was unemployed, there wasn't that subtle change of interest he had noticed in others. "That must be difficult," she commented, biting into her hot dog. A bit of mustard escaped, staining the corner of her mouth. "My brother went through that last year. If you want, I can see if the library is hiring. It doesn't pay much, but the environment is pleasant." Victor felt a lump in his throat. Her genuine concern completely disarmed him. "Thank you," he managed to say. "That would be kind of you." They walked through the square, talking about books, movies, and small observations about life. Grace talked about her childhood on a farm, about how she learned to value simple things when her family faced financial difficulties after her father's illness. "You know, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a lot of money," she commented as they watched the sunset on the park benches. "But then I think maybe it wouldn't change that much." "It wouldn't change?" Victor asked, genuinely curious. "Well, of course, it would be great not to worry about bills or being able to travel more," she smiled, playing with the strap of her bag. "But the things that really matter, true friendships, honest conversations, moments like this, don't cost anything." Victor felt his heart race. On an impulse, he asked, "Would you marry a poor man?" Grace looked at him, surprised by the direct question. Then she laughed, a musical sound that made him smile too. "What a strange question," she said, still smiling. "I wouldn't marry someone just for money if that's what you want to know. A person's character, their honesty, their ability to love. That means more than any bank account. Money comes and goes, but character remains." Those simple words touched Victor deeply. On the way home, driving his luxurious car that he had kept hidden, he felt a mixture of emotions he couldn't name. He had found something rare, someone who saw beyond the facade, even when the facade was precisely the absence of luxury. In the following meetings, Victor delved deeper into the character he had created. They talked about simple dreams, modest plans. Grace never asked about money, never suggested expensive places, never showed interest in status. Instead, she shared small joys. A book found in a second-hand bookstore, an impromptu picnic, a walk in the light rain. Victor found himself transformed. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about meetings, acquisitions, or stock market indexes. He began to notice the sky, the birds, the smell of grass after the rain, all the small things that Grace pointed out with her quiet enthusiasm. But the lie began to weigh on him. Every time Grace offered help, suggesting job openings, sharing books on financial management, or simply sharing her snack when she thought he might be saving money, Victor felt the guilt growing. By the fourth meeting, he couldn't bear it any longer. He reserved a table at Le Ciel, the most exclusive restaurant in town, where he usually took important clients. When Grace arrived, wearing a simple dress that was probably her best outfit, Victor saw the discomfort in her eyes as she observed the luxurious surroundings. "Victor?" she whispered, holding his hand across the table. "We can't afford this, let's go somewhere else." The genuine concern in her voice was the last straw. Victor took a deep breath, gently squeezing her hand. "Grace, I need to tell you something." In the following minutes, he revealed everything. His real job, his position as CEO, his wealth, his reasons for the disguise. He watched emotions pass over her face like clouds on a windy day. Surprise, confusion, understanding, and finally, something he feared. Disappointment. "So, it was all a lie?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "No," he replied quickly. "My feelings are real. I just wanted to be sure you liked me, not my money." Grace withdrew her hand from his slowly. "I understand your reasons, Victor, I really do. But we started with a lie, and that makes me question what else might not be true." She stood up, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "I need some time to think." Victor was paralyzed, watching her leave the restaurant. He tried calling countless times in the following days, left messages, even sent flowers to the library where she worked. Nothing. Grace's silence was more painful than any direct rejection. In his luxurious apartment, Victor felt more alone than ever. The important meetings, the impressive numbers, the accolades from shareholders, none of it mattered anymore. He realized that in his attempts to protect his heart, he ended up hurting someone who truly cared about him. On the third day of silence, when he had already started to accept that he had lost Grace forever, his phone vibrated with a message from her. Café Margot, 5 p.m. Café Margot was where they had once had breakfast together, a small and cozy place. Victor arrived half an hour early, nervous as a teenager on his first date. When Grace entered, her eyes were serious, but not cold. She sat across from him, placing her fabric bag on the table between them, like a small barrier. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice trembling. "Before saying anything, I need to understand," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "Why didn't you trust me from the beginning?" Victor took a deep breath, feeling that this moment would define everything. He spoke about Amanda, about the pain of betrayal, about the fear that had grown inside him. When you have money, you never really know if people are with you for who you are or for what you have, he explained, feeling the vulnerability in every word. "I just wanted to find someone who would see me. Really see me." Grace listened attentively, her green eyes never leaving his. "I understand your fear, Victor. Truly. But trust is built with honesty, not with tests. If we want to build something real, we need true foundations." "I know," he nodded, his throat tight, "and I'm willing to start over, the right way this time. No lies, no tests, just you and me, exactly as we are." Grace remained silent for a moment that seemed eternal. Then a small smile began to form at the corner of her lips. "So who are you, really, Victor Dalkamp?" It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in years, Victor spoke about himself without filters or calculations. He talked about the boy who had grown up dreaming of building something meaningful, about the sleepless nights working on his first project, about the loneliness that came with success, about how the weekly football games with friends were his refuge for sanity. Grace listened, asked questions, laughed at his awkward stories. Gradually, the barrier between them dissolved. "So," she finally said, "what do we do now?" "Can we start over?" he suggested, hopeful. "No disguises this time, but also no expensive restaurants or extravagant gifts. I want you to get to know the real Victor, not the CEO." Grace reached across the table, gently touching his hand. "I think I would like that." In the following months, they rediscovered each other. Victor showed Grace his world but did not let money define their time together. They walked through the city, talked about books in parks, cooked together in his luxurious apartment, which gradually gained her cozy touch. Plants on the windows, stacked books, small objects that told stories. On one of those nights, while they were preparing dinner together, Victor watched Grace humming as she chopped vegetables. The soft light of the kitchen illuminated her profile, and he felt a certainty he had never experienced before. "I love you," he said, almost without noticing. Grace stopped what she was doing, turning to him with a radiant smile. "I love you too, Victor. The real you." In that moment, Victor realized that the greatest fortune he had acquired was not in his bank accounts or in the business empire he had built. It was there, in the simplicity of that shared moment, in the gaze of a woman who loved him not for what he owned but for who he was. The lie that had started as a protection had almost cost the chance of finding true love. But the truth, as difficult as it was, had paved the way for something much more valuable than any material wealth, the possibility of being loved without masks, without conditions, in all its imperfect humanity. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.